Kia ora tātou, no mai, haere mai, and warm welcome to everybody for our council meeting of Wednesday, 7th of August 2024. Before we get underway, if I could ask the Deputy Mayor to perhaps open with a karakia, please.
Morena, Your Worship, o te rā tēnā tātou I hui hui mai nei I tēnei ata. Ngā mihi ki a koutou, te rā ki a tātou. Tūtawa mai runga, tūtawa mai I raro, tūtawa mai I roto, tūtawa mai I waho. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Tēnā koe Your Worship.
Kia ora, thank you. All right, have a number of people in the gallery today and probably quite a number online as well. Just explaining, the meeting is being recorded, is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In terms of health and safety, likely event of emergency, if we could please exit through the green signs in the entranceway you came in. We evacuate to the assembly area, which is the clock tower, and Te Marahine, the square, just next door to us. Smoking is prohibited and vaping, and a defibrillator, again, unlike the event of needing a defibrillator, that is located on the ground floor. Any incidences, please report them to our committee administration. If I could ask officers, as we've got a number of people online, if they perhaps just give their name and title in the first instance when speaking. And we have Councillor Michelard online as well. So look, I'll go to our apologies. Our order of business number 2 is our apologies, and we have apology from Councillor Harpiter. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no other we will look to vote, please. And that's passed 15 votes for and none against. Thank you. Moving through to number 3, notification of additional items. I don't have any. And in terms of number 4, declarations of interest, I haven't received any.
Yes,
sorry, they haven't been notified to me. Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Your Worship. With regards to item number 10, I have a conflict of interest, particularly around the Globe Theatre Trust Board.
All right, thank you. Councillor Dennison.
Mr Mayor, could I just declare an interest in item 18? It's in part 2, but on the Tamakuku Terrace.
Okay, thank you. Noted. All right. In terms of public comment, we have a number of you here today that wish to speak, so we'll have half an hour for that session. There's a number of you here, so I appreciate it. And perhaps you have 3 minutes each, and perhaps I start with Richard Shaw. Richard, welcome. So Richard, it's just pressing the button there to activate the microphone. If you just press on the right, yeah, you're on.
Kia ora tātou. Mayor Smith, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name is Richard Shaw. I'm the Professor of Politics at Massey University. I'd like to begin by acknowledging and thanking you for the positions that you took on the 1st and the 29th of May, respectively, this year, when you decided to endorse the current representation structure and to oppose the draft legislation which has brought us all to this point. I'm from Taranaki, but I've lived in Palmerston North since 1982, and it's been improved in many, many ways by decisions taken by council which have placed Te Ao Māori at the heart of the city. That world and all that it has is far more visible than it once was in Te Marae o Hine, along He Arakotahi, in the form of Te Māori Ward. Nobody has lost anything from all of this progress. Instead, we are a better place for it. But without Te Māori Ward, we would be a diminished city. If it goes, we all, Māori and non-Māori, lose. We will lose mana. We will lose democratic legitimacy. We will lose partnerships. We will lose all that rangitane bring to all of our democratic tables. So please don't take us back to the past. Don't take us back to that time when Māori were kept in their place. Don't take us back to that time when many of us who are not Māori felt threatened by all that tangata whenua have to offer. Don't take us back to that time when some of us hid our fear of Māori behind the self-serving magical fiction that we are all treated equally in this motu. Instead, please take us forward. Take us into a future in which the 30% of young people across Aotearoa, New Zealand, who will identify as Māori by 2043 will be able to see themselves in this place. Keep us heading, as you did in your submission to the Justice Select Committee, into a future in which we are all, Māori and tangata tiriti, afforded the dignity of having our sense of who we are upheld in the city. Please, stand firm in your convictions. Honour the city crest in this chamber which depicts both Māori and Pākehā, and resolve to retain Te Pōao Māori Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin Campbell, are you here? Kevin, welcome.
Sorry about that. Kia ora, my name is Kevin Campbell. I'm from the Māori Ward. I am here today to urge councillors to vote for the retention of the Māori Ward, option 1. I also thank you for the past and your decisions in respect to the wards. I would say to councillors it would be irresponsible to vote for either option 2A or 2B. And I say that because, among other things, the haste in which this legislation has come both to local body and to central government, it would be irresponsible because of the very strong opposition to this legislation by the Human Rights Commission. I'm a lawyer by trade. I am appalled to have read that report and submission of the Human Rights Commission. It would be irresponsible to disregard the extensive Waitangi Tribunal report that I believe was tabled about 3 days before this bill was introduced to the House. It would be irresponsible because this legislation is pernicious. I quote a dictionary definition of pernicious, quote, having a harmful effect, especially in a gradual or subtle way, unquote. This is not the time or the place for a debate about an examination of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, but councillors, this is the place to alert you, councillors, of the real harm to the treaty that will be caused by this legislation. And I urge you to read the report of the Human Rights Commission and the Waitangi Tribunal if you haven't. If you have, it wouldn't hurt to read it again. In the Human Rights Commission and Waitangi Tribunal reports, there is set out the injury that this legislation will cause, particularly the damage to our social cohesion. Don't add insult to that injury. Vote to retain the wards today. I would ask you to consider when you vote as if it was your ward that was the subject of this vote. Would you vote to disestablish your ward in 2025? How would you account to your people who voted for you in 2022 if you were to vote for the disestablishment of their ward in 2025? How is a Māori ward any different? And finally, although it might be token, it is sincere. I offer an apology to Councillor Marshall Lobb and Councillor Fitzgerald. I apologise for the indignity that you have endured through this process. Thank you. That's my 3 minutes.
I knew we had a job for you, councillor Arnott. That's good.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Our next speaker, Kim Penny.
Kia ora, ko Kim Penny aho. I'm the chairperson of Te Pū Harakeke Community Collective Maramatua, and I just want to take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Kat Nugent, who is our newly appointed manager who starts in 3 weeks' time. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to speak, but I'm actually really sorry to be here submitting on a Hobson's choice on an issue that I thought we as a city had already very firmly decided. As many of you will recall, Te Pū Harakeke wrote a letter, a submission to the council earlier this year, and it was signed by 29 community organisations and over 50 individuals. The submission has also been sent to the Honourable Simeon Brown, the Minister of Local Government. In the submission, we asked for the retention of Māori wards for a number of reasons, but primarily because they ensured Māori have secure and meaningful seats at the tables where important decisions are made. Sadly, I note that central government legislation has made our suggestion somewhat moot. We support option 1 as the fractionally better of the two poor options, but I do wonder if civil disobedience and not carrying out the required legislation is still on the cards, as discussed earlier this year. Thank you.
Bishop Peter Callanay. Peter, welcome.
Your Worship, Honourable Councillors and members of the public, kia ora koutou katoa, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. The Council has my very genuine sympathy being forced to choose between the devil and the deep blue sea. This legislation is premised on the misuse of the principle one person, one vote. That's an important principle, but it's in the service of a higher value, namely people's right to participate. That's why it needs to be supplemented by other means of ensuring that numerically smaller groups can take their place on decision-making bodies, from which they could be permanently excluded if their representation depended entirely on numerical majorities. The role of Māori wards gives us another way of safeguarding people's right to participate. It does not contradict the principle one person, one vote. It does what one person, one vote on its own cannot do. There are two ways of contributing to what democracy is intended for. Efforts to undo the role of Māori wards are gratuitous and unnecessary. In my view, there is something very distasteful about this and other efforts to downgrade the status of tangata whenua. And it puts this legislation on the wrong side of history. I congratulate the Palmerston North City Council for having Māori ward representations, and I hope this can continue for a very long time. Kia kaha, and thank you.
And Pania Marsh, welcome.
Do I have to push anything to make it work, or just go? We're good to go? Okay. Kia ora whanau, my name's Pani Marsh. I'm a level 1 NCEA teacher. I won't say where. But why I'm here is because I also used to work for the iwi, and when I saw COVID happen, the iwi activated quicker than anybody else. When I go to school, I'm seeing the social economic impact of what's happening in Palmerston North, because whether we like to admit it or not, Palmerston North has one of the highest crime rates per capita in New Zealand. We sit on the banks of one of the most paruwest rivers in New Zealand. It's time to stop coming at each other with rarurarus, and it's time to come together. Kotahitanga is the way forward. For our children that sit in my classroom, they're all Māori. They have to live and grow up here. And if we come together, instead of wasting time saying, you can't vote, you can vote, and we use big brains and big solutions, like rangitane, because our Māori solutions are not solutions just for Māori, they're Māori solutions for the mainstream. They never not worked, we just weren't allowed to practice them. And when we do practice them, chef's kiss, amazing. As you can tell, I didn't practice anything, I didn't know I was going to speak, so yep, aroha mai my professionalism. But I'm seeing my children come to school every day, they don't have food, or there's so much crack in our communities, there's all of these shootings, there's all of these. We need to come together as kotahitanga, stand together and have solutions, not rarurarus. Kia ora, I've got to go back to work now, I wasn't meant to be here.
All right. Well, thank you for those that have chosen to make public comment. Appreciate your commentary. So, councillors, we have a recommendation to council there that we receive the public comments. I'm happy to move those. Seconded by the Mayor. Are there any comments? There being none, we will vote, please. That's passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right. I've got my list here and we haven't received any notice for that. I'm sorry. We do need to receive it before the meeting. Right, we move through to 6 confirmation of minutes on page 7 of your papers, councillors. And this is around recommending to council the minutes of the ordinary council meeting 26th of June 2024, part 1, public be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll take these together if that is okay. And then the second is the minutes of the extraordinary council meeting the 5th of July 2024, part 1, public be confirmed as a true and correct record as well. I'll look to move those. Seconded by Councillor Johnson. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. That's passed 13 votes for with 1 abstention. Thank you. Yeah, I realise that, but they have to be, and I mean, we've got a majority, so they've missed. All right, we'll move through to number 8, which is around the Māori wards in response to the Māori wards legislation change, and we have a paper on page 25 of your papers, and I'll ask our governance manager, Hannah White, to speak to that, please.
Morena tātou. Apologies for the sound this morning for those in the gallery. I'm not quite sure what's going on, so I'll do my best to speak as loud as possible. Members, the paper before you, you're very aware, I'm only bringing it to you because we have a legislation change which is requiring a decision of you. The government is asking, or necessitating that you make a decision before the 6th of September, and that decision is whether you wish to retain your Māori Ward, Te Puawa Ward, or whether you wish to remove it. If you choose option 1 this morning, that will then mean that when we go to the local election in October 2025, we must have a binding referendum on the same question, and the result of that referendum would hold for the 2028 and 2031 local elections. If you chose to consider removing it, I would look at your direction to bring you another report at the next council meeting in order to make that decision deadline, because there are a series of technical decisions that you would have to make, including putting an initial proposal for a representation review by the 13th of September. Happy to take your questions.
Thank you. There are a number. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is similar to one I asked in May, and that is, if this council resolved not to do a binding referendum with the next election, can we understand if there would be any implications of that?
The amendment bill became an act. It became law on the 31st of July. That means it's in place. The law itself does not have any penalties in it. However, you would be opening yourself up to significant risk. Ultimately, when it came to an election, our electoral officer would have to apply the law and follow the electoral regulations around what the referendum would look like. That's all I could say to the question.
And in terms of the oath that we all swore when we were put into office here to act in the best interests of our community, if we believe that we would not be following through on that commitment, which legislation supersedes the other in terms of our commitment under the Local Government Act?
I'm going to have to throw the baton to either the Legal Counsel or the Chief Executive on that question, sorry.
Welcome back, councillors. I understand the intent of the question. We have some new legislation in front of us. I'm not sure what the consequences would be if you chose to test it in your vote today. We would have to simply see what the results that might be as a result of the decision that you make today, and then take that back and get some further advice around it. It's pretty difficult to kind of make provide you with a decent answer to the questions that you're asking.
Thank you. So just to follow on from that, option 1 in the analysis of options does include that the binding poll would be held. So if this council wishes to proceed with retaining Te Pua Māori Ward, but does not wish to proceed with a binding poll, would that direction need to be given today, or could that be given at a later date?
You could note that in your resolution whether you did that today, tomorrow, or the next day. Ultimately, you only have 2 choices under this legislation, and the choice to retain by consequence requires a poll.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave that for now.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. Just some questions around what might happen journeying toward the referendum. Based on our historic experience, is there a risk that misinformation or disinformation would play a role in that referendum?
Yes.
Can you give us a sense of the timing of that risk and the scale of that risk?
Timing-wise, many councils are making this decision in the next few weeks. Certainly there are several across the country making it today. So the conversations are happening in the community now. So I think the timer started back from, we're already in it.
And in terms of what options are available to council to counter the risk of misinformation and disinformation skewing? What may
Provision of
happen?
information from council to balance that.
And what's underway? What resources there to deliver that?
There is within house the resources that we always have. So our fantastic comms team, our fantastic web team, myself and my team, as human resource. As any budget towards that, there is none, as we didn't intend to do this. This was not part of the long-term plan of council.
And would budget be helpful?
At this stage, we're still working out what a communication strategy might look like and what the role of officers might be and what the role of elected members might be. So as we work through that, we would bring something back to you.
Great, so we could expect to see a paper coming that would outline what could happen and the budget needed to activate that.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. Following on from Councillor Barrett's questions around an information campaign that council might run should we opt for option 1, would you anticipate that council staff in running that campaign would reflect the position of council, or would it be a more neutral campaign, the likes of which we see sometimes for, the regular elections?
That's something we're still working through. You'll appreciate this legislation has been rushed and amongst all of our other BAU, and so we haven't come to any conclusions on that yet. I'm also waiting on some legal advice that's been commissioned by Taituara on behalf of the sector to seek to weigh up some of those risks for councils taking a particular position. Clearly, historically, this council has had a position, so I think that's a good foundation for us at this point.
So, would staff need a direction from council about taking a position? Because, I'm nervous that we'll end up with a both sides type of argument, which I don't think would fairly reflect probably the views around the table.
Once we had that advice, I'd be very happy to share it with you and then request your direction at that point.
Okay, thank you. And as regards the options available to us today, Councillor Naylor has already explored whether we have the option of not proceeding with a referendum. Do we have the option of not taking a decision?
No. The original amendment bill did allow you to do that, but it was then amended before it became legislation, and that amendment required you now to not passively wait until the referendum, but to require you to take a decision by the 6th of September.
So if, for example, we were to put this report on the table and take no decision, what would happen?
Again, in reference to my answer to Councillor Naylor, there's no penalties in the bill, it's in the Act itself. So we'd be opening ourselves up to risks unknown.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Hannah. Just a couple of questions. The first one really just refers to page 26, where you outline the risks in respect of not being able to consult on this prior to the poll. Can you just expand on that, please? I just really want to get, I guess, a verbal record of what that actually means.
Sure. So the legislation came into play on 31 July. The legislation requires a decision by 6th of September. Elected members will be well aware that if we consult on any issue, there's a fair amount of pre-work and pre-engagement that goes on with stakeholders to develop a position. Then we would go out through a consultation with a preferred option. That would usually be open for a month. And then we would offer to anyone that made a submission the ability to come and be heard and to speak to you, to put their position, and you would come back and debate from what you've heard from what we've heard from residents, as well as any evidence that's presented to you, and then you would make a decision. That would be our usual consultative procedure that we run, whether it's special consultative or not. That's another level that requires some more specifics on top of that. That's how local government does things. This piece of legislation has not allowed you the time to do that. The government and the minister himself recognises that that is the case, and so explicitly the Act says special consultative procedure, which does require a full month, is not required simply because it's not logistically possible. So you do not have the time to do a consultation justice.
So in short, the timeline imposed by the legislation actually undermines democracy. Would that be a fair assessment?
What I could say is the legislation acknowledges that it's not in the spirit of the Local Government Act.
Thank you. The second question, and this is just really a reminder as well, just in terms of the select committee process that was prior to this legislation coming into being, can you just remind us what was the lead time that was provided by government for submissions, please?
Off the top of my head, 3 days.
Well, thank you. Would that be unusual?
If you look historically at how Parliament's done things over time, yes.
Thank you, Hannah. Mr. Mayor.
Hannah, just in terms of option 1, there you know that a poll estimate is approximately $60,000. Yet it'll be going out with papers that are already going out. How do we get to $60,000? Is that the time in the background of you and others?
It's not me. It is a generous estimate. I'm hoping we're going to be able to get it down. A lot of it is the extra printing costs, because you have to have multiple extra pages that go out with everybody's voting documents, the design costs to do that, and then the electoral officer fee to do that job on top of the other job that they need to do for the election.
But that'll be pretty standard, won't it?
Oh, it's very standard. The cost is only multiplied by the number of electors you have in your district.
Yeah.
Yeah, so even the absolute smallest councils, the minimum they're going to be charged is about $15,000 to do the job.
Okay, all right. So we'll see a difference in that number, obviously.
Across the country is, yes.
No, our number.
Oh, yeah, so that's
on the high
for
side.
Palmerston North. Yeah, I'm hoping that that's on the high side.
Yeah, well, just my old trade was printing and everything else, and that seems exceptionally high.
The printing for the election in general this year is going up between 25 and 40%, and that printing is done across the country for entire elections. It's one of those factors we have with postal elections.
Yeah, no, I realise, but yeah, I'm just questioning it. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to follow up on your question about the financial there, this approximately $60,000 that the government is requiring us to spend, how do we invoice the government for that?
Pass. We can't.
Why can't we?
Through the chair, those costs sit with local government. It's part of our processes, unfortunately.
Thank you. Referencing the questions from Councillor Barrett and Councillor Johnson about next steps in terms of communication and a proposed budget for that, has any consideration been given to the likely outcome of that disinformation campaign, which I see just reported today has resulted in an elected member's car being shot at in New Plymouth? Is there any consideration in there for protection for people who take a particular view on this subject, elected members or community leaders?
Yes, that's certainly part of my considerations.
And that will be part of your report. Thank you. And on the matter raised by Councillor Naylor about the referendum, is it prescribed in the legislation that the referendum must be held across our whole electorate?
Yes.
So we don't have the option of just having a referendum of the people affected by this decision, which are the people on our Māori Ward?
No, you don't.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah, and again for support. Hannah, I'm just wondering support in this gallery today, if you would just explain what the voting papers might look like in 2025 on the assumption that today we vote not to disestablish the Māori wards.
Certainly. So when you receive your voting papers, you will have 4 votes to make if you live in Palmerston North. So your first vote would be for your mayor. Your second vote would be for the councillors that you preferred to represent you. And if you are on the general roll, that would be the Te Hirawanui General Ward. If you are on the Māori roll, that would be the Te Puao Ward. So you would make your preference votes for the councillors you preferred to represent you. That would be your second vote. Then your third vote would be for the councillor that you wish to represent you for Horizons. Horizons also has a Māori ward for the, well, they have 2 Māori wards, but the ward for Palmerston North, if you lived here, you'd be voting for that one if you're on the Māori electoral roll, or if you're on the general roll, you'd be voting for the Palmerston North electorate for Horizons. That would be your third vote, and then your fourth vote would be this referendum. So this would be the question as to whether you wished, actually it'd be 5 because you'd have Horizons as well. So the fourth one would be whether you wished Palmerston North City Council to retain its Māori ward, and your fifth question would be whether you wished Horizons Regional Council to retain its Māori ward.
Thanks, Hannah. So just to clarify, the narrative around the 5% that forces a referendum poll, does the actual results of the referendum still need to be 50-50 in terms of support for yes or no?
So, Councillor Fitzgerald, your question is around the 5% piece. So there's 2 parts, well actually 3 parts to this legislation. One is entirely different, it's about the dates for the election, so we'll leave that aside. The other 2 parts to this legislation, one is putting the old legislation in place. That's the old legislation that allowed 5% of voters to get together basically in a petition and say that they wanted to have a poll about Māori wards. That is going back in place. That's the substantive piece of the legislation. What we're discussing today is the transition piece of the legislation. So that's right now what we have to do is potentially have a referendum in October 2025. Whether we're talking about the poll called by 5% electors or the referendum forced as a result of the legislation change, both of those, the result would have to be a majority. So the majority to retain or the majority to remove would then bind the council in either situation for the next 2 elections.
Thank you, Hannah. And just one last question. For the general elections in 2031 to affect 2034, the Māori ward discussion could pop up again on another binding poll.
That's right. So if you had the referendum in October 2025, that would hold for 2028 and 2031. But the members have been around the table more than 6 years. Will remember every 6 years we have a representation review, and that looks at all our representation arrangements. One of those would be due, but potentially would be limited by the result of the poll. But then again, when we're getting to 2031, we're thinking about the future election, so we would be looking again to potentially have a rep review or potentially have another poll. It becomes available again for people to call another poll. The cost that the Mayor was mentioning earlier would be a lot more in a situation where a poll was called, because you would be doing it outside of the election period, and so we're talking about $150,000.
Sorry, one last question, Mr. Mayor. Hannah, given what the Labour government did to throw out this piece of legislation in the first place, if there was a change of government at the next election, could the incoming government do the same thing?
Change the legislation, yes.
Thank you.
So just on that, just so it's clear in my mind, both general and Māori registered ward voters can vote on
the referendum?
In the referendum.
All yes,
Right.
all are given that option.
Okay, cool. And it's a straight 50-50 majority
Yes.
in that referendum, isn't it? It's not none of this 5% stuff.
No.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, thank you. All right, that's questions done. Thank you. All right, I'll look to recommendations there to council that council resolve to retain the Te Puru Māori Ward, option 1. I'm going to look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And we've got an additional one here from Councillor Naylor. We'll come to that second because it doesn't actually affect the first one. I think it's an addition, but I'm quite happy to make it an amendment. So, Councillor, we'll get that up. Do you want to speak to it? Thank you. It's quite long, so yep. Yes, there's a seconder on at the top.
If we're taking it as an amendment, you need to move it first, and then she moves to amend it.
Okay, well, I haven't. All right, over to you, Councillor. You've got the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This amendment is adding to the. I'm obviously very happy to support council to retain Te Pua Māori wards. However, I'm not comfortable at this point with the correlation to that means that a binding poll is required. Personally, when I came into office and I swore the oath to act in the best interests of my community, I didn't anticipate that the government would be asking me to vote in such a way that actually opposes what I believe is in the best interests of our community. So at this point, whilst I support retaining Te Pua Māori wards, I don't support the idea of putting a binding referendum out to our community. I realise that has been put into legislation, and the answers to the questions to date is that that hasn't been tested as to the full implications. But if this council was to consider acting outside of this new legislation, I think it's important that we have the best information possible. So this amendment is really just asking the CE to provide further information to council on potential implications of us not proceeding with a binding referendum. I think a binding referendum is not only divisive, it's an unnecessary distraction to the really important work that this council needs to do on behalf of our community in the coming years. And it's also very costly, not only financially, but socially. So I think this, whilst perhaps might seem rather dramatic, I think this is a very real option that this council needs to consider. So I think the first steps on that is to ask the CE for some further information on that. So for that reason, I've proposed this as an amendment to that recommendation and seconded by Councillor Bowen.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Absolutely agree with the comments made by Councillor Naylor in moving this. As she said, this is divisive, it's costly. I'll go further, I'll say it's dangerous, and that's what we've seen this morning in what was reported from New Plymouth. This is actually dangerous, a dangerous route that we're setting out for our community and the government is setting for our country generally. It's disrespectful in its entirety, and speaking, I'm very glad we're voting to retain the Māori Ward and speaking to the whole thing. I think this whole proposal is disrespectful. It's disrespectful to Te Tiriti itself. It's disrespectful to Māori and particularly to our Māori Ward councillors. And I do thank our member of the community who expressed that in their comments. It's disrespectful to treaty partners, to treaty allies, many of whom are reflected in our gallery today is disrespectful, hugely disrespectful to local government and the decisions that we take in full consciousness of the weight of the oath that we take to serve our community. So, yep, I'd say it's dangerous and disrespectful, but I would agree with the comment made in the House on the third reading of this, that beyond that, this is a bloody disgrace. Absolute disgrace. I'm appalled that we're in this situation. Our community members have spoken really eloquently to this morning, said that nobody loses anything through Māori Wards. Everybody has something to gain. That ironically, we're faced with a Hobson's choice. Put that in your pipe, Hobson's, please smoke it. The choice between what's offered or nothing at all. It's disrespectful. A choice, as our bishop said, between the devil and the deep blue sea. Māori solutions are for everyone, not just Māori. We're better with a Māori ward. We're better with Māori ward councillors, and I find this hugely offensive.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Speaking to the amendment, and I'll reserve my right to speak on the substantive, but just in terms of the amendment, you'll have noticed from my questions that I was trying to explore whether or not there's a third way in this, because I really feel that the government has put us in an invidious position where we have to choose between disestablishing our ward or, if we choose to retain it, going to a referendum. I think Palmerston North is in quite a unique position in this regard, because we went through the poll on our first decision to establish Māori wards, and we saw what it was like when outsiders came into the city, people that didn't know our community, people who were paid to collect signatures for a poll, people who spread disinformation and lies about our community and about what it would mean to have a Māori ward. And we saw the effect of that when the poll achieved its aim and forced a referendum, and subsequently the referendum was narrowly lost. So we know in this community the consequences of going through this. It's bitter. It's an excuse for racists to come out of the woodwork and just insult and abuse our Māori community. I don't really want to be a part of that. I don't want to be in a position where my vote to retain a Māori ward, which I think is vital, has the consequence of exposing our community to a really bitter referendum. So I would be very keen to explore what the options are available to us to not proceed with a binding referendum. And I'll note as well that this binding referendum is only being applied to this decision. The government doesn't impose a binding referendum on any other aspect of decisions that we might make for our local community. And government likes to talk about democracy. The bitter irony is that they're bypassing democracy here, whereby the democratically elected representatives of a community are no longer allowed to make the decisions that they think are in the best interests of the community. It's totally wrong. So as far as I'm concerned, I think obviously, and I'm quite confident that we'll vote to retain the ward, but I think if we should be doing everything in our power to avoid exposing our community to a bitter, and it will be bitter, referendum process. So I'm very happy to support this amendment, and I will speak further on the substantive once the vote on the amendment is passed.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Tēnā koutou mai nei tēnei ata. To everybody in the House, good morning. We just have to go back to the very emotional council meeting of 1st of May to express and experience what coming together means for the City Council. I'm not going to repeat all of the wonderful sentiment that has been part of this discussion for 10 months now, and it's 10 months that my tuakana, Deputy Mayor Debbie Lobb and I have had to sit inside this conversation, this nationwide conversation. It's 10 months now that we've had to participate in this nationwide conversation. It's 10 months now that we find ourselves today, as my learned colleague to my left points out, we've been put into a Hobson's choice of take it or leave it type thing. But what I've noticed, particularly in the last month, and if not yesterday, is the groundswell of support, which Debbie and I expect from our Māori community, our Pacifica community, cousins and all that, but from our non-Māori community. And I wasn't going to cry today until the very learned colleague, Mr. Kevin Campbell, apologised for the indignity that Debbie and I have had to sit through. Tēnā koe tangatia, thank you very much for those sentiments. So I just want to say thank you to all of our non-Māori community members, our organisations there too, our Pacifica communities, who also see the indignity that has been forced upon our Māori Ward councillors throughout the country. Richard Shaw, don't take us back. Thank you for that. Bishop Cullinane, lovely to see you, Bishop Cullinane. Tēnā koe. You know, the one person, one vote cannot do participation. Emails from Rebecca James, Julie Burnell, Elaine Riley, Frank Bolton, Brian Way, Aaron Oliver, Kirsty Hardendorp, Nigel Webb, they just came through last night and I've never met them. So I just want to say thank you to all of our community and to my councillor colleagues at the table. I'm confident that we'll get through this today with a yes, but I would ask three things of my councillor colleagues. Vote yes today not to disestablish the Aotearoa Māori Ward, that's number one. Secondly, at next year's October elections, please, in your spheres of influence, the groups that you support, take the same message to them. As we've heard today, that referendum is going to require a majority vote so that we don't just say yes today and risk losing it in October next year. And thirdly, there's an opportunity for our council, as well as all other councils in New Zealand, to become advocates to doing something about this legislation, which my learned colleague, Councillor Johnson, was talking about. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to briefly on the amendment specifically. I have every intention of supporting substantive to resolve to retain the Māori Ward and put it to referendum, but I want to talk on what this amendment does, because I have some serious concerns. If this becomes a substantive, well then I will likely support it, but I'm not going to vote for the amendment itself, and I want to be clear as to why. If we decide to protest the government and act illegally in not holding a referendum, the likely result is that the government will tell us to make a decision, either to retain Māori wards and have a referendum, or to disestablish Māori wards. If we choose to still act illegally and not have a referendum, in all likelihood this council will be dissolved and commissioners will be put in place by the government that you choose to protest. And the end result of that is either A, they make the decision anyway and it goes to referendum, or the worst option, which is they choose to disestablish Māori wards full stop, and that's it. So that's the risk we run with this amendment. I completely understand where you're coming from. I understand your frustration. I get why you want to do this, but we run the risk that option 2 is the decision that commissioners would make. And so I can't personally support an amendment which runs the risk of this council being dissolved by acting illegally. If this becomes a substantive, then yes, I will support it in the investigative stage. But if it comes down to it at the end of the day, council, I don't believe we can choose to act against legislation. There are lots of things this government and governments in the past have imposed on us that cost our community hugely. We've been talking about wastewater and the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars that legislation are imposing on our community that I don't believe are in the best interests of our people, but we don't have a choice. And so I don't like the choice in front of us. I appreciate the passion that our councillors have shown, but I think we seriously run the risk of option 2 being the result that commissioners would choose if we go down this pathway, and I don't think that's in the interests of our community, so I hope you can appreciate where I'm coming from.
Councillor Mickelard online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Great. reserve my right to speak to the substantive. But at the same time, just want to speak quickly on the amendment. I totally understand the sentiment expressed by the mover, and I get what the mover is trying to do. But similarly, similar to Councillor Wood, as a law student or former politics student, we run the risk. There's an organizational reputation here as well, and we run the risk of having commissioners coming, just the government establishing commissioners because we're choosing to dissent and rebel against a law that's been established. The legislation has passed its first, second, and third reading. And while I don't support the legislation itself because I believe it's racist in intent, but dissenting against the government, we just open a can of worms, and there are a lot of unintended consequences associated with this. So that's something that I'm not willing to go. That's not a path I'm willing to follow. So for that reason, I'll be voting against the amendment, just because of the organizational reputation, of organizational risk that the path that we're trying on. And so simply because I don't want commissioners running Palmerston North, and that will literally take away the very key element that we're trying to defend here, which is democracy. And yeah, so I'll leave it at that, but I'll come back to the substantive and make further comments. But for that purpose, I'll be voting against the amendment. I totally get I totally get the intent of the mover, but I think it's not the right way to go. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you. I also reserve my right to speak on the substantive if need be, but so I think we want to be clear. This is further information. It's not making a decision. That the concern coming from our previous two speakers, Demir, highlighting the risks of, and I think it does send a message. It sounds a message that this is the wrong decision. This is the wrong direction. And for a range of reasons, not only the cost, but the implication of people's choice to vote in an open, fair, transparent process and be represented by people that they have confidence in. And so on that principle, I just wanted to make that point very clear, that this is asking for more information, and I think that's very safe. Thank you.
Councillor Sabellin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, just speaking to the amendment and also reserving my right to speak to the substantive, just to address some of the points that have been made, particularly about the risk of handing all the power to the government. The government have all the power already. That's why we're in this situation. But we know that it hasn't been tested. The consequences are not apparent, and it hasn't been tested, so let's test it. We don't need to come at this from a place of fear of what could happen. Actually, we can come at this from a place of love and be the leaders and be the change that we want to be. And at the very least, we can look for more information about what that looks like. So please support this amendment.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The two previous speakers really covered the points that I was going to make. And that is, this is really just an investigative step, so therefore it's about actually finding out and getting some definitive answers around what this would actually mean for our council. And the second part of that, of course, is the point which has already been made, is this actually sends a message to government that we are very, very uncomfortable with this direction, and that we will consider every option available to us not to put our community through a binding referendum, which, as has been already said, will cause rivalry. So let's support this, and I reserve the right to speak to the substantive. Thank you.
Right, a reply, Councillor.
Thank you. I think the issues have been really covered well by my colleagues, and as a few have already pointed out, this is simply asking for that information. And I wouldn't be suggesting asking for this information unless I was seriously thinking it was in our community's benefit for us to seriously consider going down this route. But I do think the best decisions are ones where we are well informed as much as possible. So that's why I do think it's important for this perhaps to be a two-stage process and to ask for that information first. Councillor Bowen mentioned how dangerous it can be for us to go, for us to proceed with potentially a bind. Mentioned it in May. From my perspective, for my mokopuna and for many people in our community, it's a less safe community when there are not Māori wards in place. So it's dear to many of our hearts, and I think this is the best next step.
All right. Councillors, we will vote on the amendment that's in front of us here around CE providing further information to Council on potential implications of Council not proceeding with a binding referendum. Ask you to vote, please. Pass 13 votes for and 2 against. I had sympathy with all sides there, and I must admit I was swinging as a voter there. As a vote, because I signed up to an oath, which is around respecting the law as well. So it's our people, but also the law. But I have no problems with the CE finding more information about what we must do. Also, I just wonder if we do trust our electorate as well. We're Palmerston North, and our relationship with Māori, and especially mana whenua rangitane, is really special and quite unique. There was conflict here, or there was little conflict here. Manakitanga was evident from the day Snelson and everybody else arrived. Early leaders respected each other. We're one of the few places that has an Indigenous leader, a statue in our centre of our city. And that was erected in 1907. Imagine how different the country and the city or the town that those days was. We have Richard Shaw mentioned our crest. We're one of 3 councils, one of 3 of 78 councils that have tangata whenua on their crest. Hutt and Dunedin have it. They don't even show theirs. We proudly show ours. So I think there's a real difference there. And we have a beautiful square to Marae Ahine, which has been a honoured space for literally centuries. So I do wonder, and remember that if it ever did come to a referendum, the outsiders that have come in the past will need to spread themselves pretty thin, because there'll be 43 other councils probably in this space. And as we know, they were outsiders, and they did spread misinformation. So I'm very comfortable of retaining the Māori Ward. I've seen the benefits of it in action, but I just want to say Palmerston North shouldn't fear any of this, because I do think we're different. I do think we're unique, and our relationship with rangitane and Māori in general is probably an exemplar for local government. So very happy to move this and retain Māori wards. Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to support retaining the Māori Ward in Palmerston North. And I'd just like to say it's been a position that I've taken through very many debates over the years. And if the community didn't support me taking that position, they've had numerous opportunities to vote me out of council. They've chosen not to do that, and that is democracy. We don't need to be having a referendum on every decision that council makes. So let's just get that one out of the way to start with. Secondly, this whole process that the government has gone through to bring this legislation in has been flawed. It's been flawed in its timescale. It's been flawed in the way that the majority of submissions to the Select Committee were completely ignored. We sent people down to the Select Committee. I was one of the people that was there. We spoke to the members on the Select Committee. It was very clear that minds were made up already. Very clear to us. And there was no compromise, no spirit of listening and making some concession to the very many councils that submitted against this legislation. And in fact, the decision was challenged through the Waitangi Tribunal, and I'd just like to read you some of the comments that they made about this legislation. They said that the plan was inappropriate and excessive and would restrict Māori involvement in local government. They said that the evidence we've seen in this inquiry in respect of reintroducing the poll provisions concerning Māori Ward shows the same prioritisation in operation. In every policy document, the coalition agreements take precedence over the treaty. In some instances, literally by being placed earlier and more centrally in policy documents. And also that they found breaches of principles of mutual benefit and options which would cause significant prejudice to Māori. So the government, in spite of that, has continued on in this vein. And if you take a bigger picture look at this, it's part of a whole raft of anti-Māori legislation that's been brought in by this government almost from day one. Now, we might think that nobody's really looking at New Zealand, that we're tucked away at the bottom of the Pacific. But let me tell you, I was recently in Ireland. I was contacted by the national radio station in Ireland and asked to do an interview about the effect on Māori of the anti-Māori legislation that this government in New Zealand was putting through. So people are looking at us all over the world, and quite frankly, they're appalled at what they see. So we shouldn't kid ourselves that this is just, a little local difficulty in New Zealand. This is something that is being looked at by governments and populations across the world, and not being looked at with any pride or any kind of approval, but actually in horror. In horror that this is how New Zealand would treat the Indigenous people of our country. And I'm appalled by it. It's been described as racist legislation in Parliament, and I believe that that's a fair description. So why are we yet again being forced to go through another debate, potentially a referendum in our own community, when it's clear that we have Māori wards here and they're working well? So I want to acknowledge the public comment today. I know that it's hard to come in and speak to council. I also know that, people have got possibly better things to be doing with their day than coming in here. But I think it's important because so often these debates are characterised as, the community doesn't really care, or nobody really... a full public gallery tells us that the community does care. So thank you. Appreciate that. And just in closing, I want to say that there are Māori seats in Parliament. Parliament itself recognises that it's important to have that representation. Why then would they deny that representation to local government? And I'm very much afraid that the answer is in the coalition agreement, that a small party that got less than 10% of the votes is influencing a major party in what legislation is conducted. Is that dramatic? Don't really think so. So I think it's very likely, knowing the council as I do, that we will vote to support retaining the Māori Ward. But there's much bigger things at play here. And I do hope that if we do end up having to do a referendum, that all of you who are here today and those who are listening online will work as hard as you can to get correct information out to people so that they can support Māori Ward in Palmerston North. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, o te rā tēnā koutou. I'm pleased to follow right behind Councillor Johnson, even though she stole some of my wind there. But I do want to acknowledge and appreciate those of you who have come along to support the Māori wards. Let me move a bit closer. I have a quiet voice, they say. Additionally, I also want to acknowledge those who gave public comment. Thank you so much. Kei ronga no atu koutou. And just your presence here says a lot. Additionally, I acknowledge my fellow councillors and our staff who have exemplified working together respectfully and constructively with Māori. I've written this down because, as the Tungane Paroli had mentioned, last time was quite emotional, so I better not go down there again. But I must express my dismay and disappointment at the coalition government that they passed last week the Local Government Amendment Bill, because I believe it reverses the progress that we have made as towards Māori representation on local councils, just like ours. And I think, I agree with the Mayor, I think we are exemplary in that respect. This latest legislation joins a recent sustained suite of legislation and policies that directly impact Māori. And it does provide a context. That being from Māori wards to treaty principles to Section 7AA to youth boot camps to the amendment of the Marine and Coastal Area Act and more. The list goes on. I would hope that we all think critically about these things, that we would be called to action to resist anything that erodes equity and justice, or our own council's values of working together harmoniously and with our entire community. Māori wards ensure that there is guaranteed representation for Māori at the decision-making table. This is crucial for a truly representative democracy where all voices are heard and considered. Councillors of Māori wards are directly accountable to Māori voters, ensuring that their specific needs and perspectives are addressed. Māori councillors elected from general seats may not have the mandate from their Māori constituents, which means they aren't necessarily obligated to advocate on their behalf. Māori wards rectified this by providing councillors who are mandated to represent Māori interests. I acknowledge Councillor Bridget. Tēnā koe tahira. While there are other ways to achieve Māori representation, such as Māori statutory boards, these do not also allow for direct influence on the governing body. It's important to compare these models with Māori wards to understand the difference in the power to effect change. Before the implementation of Māori wards, Palmerston North, like many other councils, did not have a formal system that provided Māori with a direct and powerful voice in council decisions. Advice was sought, but there was no requirement to accept that advice. In saying that also, I want to acknowledge that the Mayor is quite right. Palmerston North City Council and Māori have worked strongly together, mai rano, since the inception of our city. And therefore, I think that sets us apart from others as well. There was a referendum in Auckland which showed that while a significant portion of Māori supported the establishment of Māori Ward, the majority who voted against it were non-Māori. This highlights the issue of referendums, where the majority can override the interests of minority groups, even when the outcome does not directly affect them. Māori should have the autonomy to choose how they wish to be represented without interference from other groups. This is a matter of self-determination and respecting the rights of Māori as the Indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. The bill to reinstate binding referendums on Māori wards is discriminatory, as mentioned by Councillor Johnson and other councillors around the table, as it subjects only Māori wards to this process, unlike any other ward. Such referendums undermine the ability of councils to make decisions that they believe are in the best interests of all their constituents, and I may to Councillor Naylor. I agree, referendums are expensive and they may force councils to dismantle Māori wards simply to save money, even if they believe in their value. This financial burden is compounded by the existing pressure on councils to manage costs effectively. I agree with Mr. Campbell's public comment that it has the potential to damage our social cohesion, and as Bishop Kalanei ngā mihi ki a koe e pā, stated, it downgrades the status of tangata whenua. These points collectively argue for the importance of Māori wards in ensuring that Māori have a meaningful and powerful voice in local government, which is essential for a fair and equitable society. It's about recognising the unique status of Māori, and I mihi ki ngā whanaunga, ngā tuakana mai te moana nui a Kiwa, tēnā koutou, our Pacifica whānau as well, our etu, koutou katoa. It's about recognising the unique status of Māori as tangata whenua and ensuring the right to self-representation is upheld and heard. Nō reira, ngā tino mihi ki a koutou katoa, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou.
Councillor Mickelard online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take this opportunity just to comment on the substantive as well, and we'll probably ask for division on the second amendment that was passed earlier on. Before I speak, I just want to acknowledge the gallery for the comments that were made earlier on, and also I just want to also acknowledge in particular my former lecturer Richard Shaw was also in the gallery. I support option 1, that the council resolve to retain Māori wards. If I look at it this way, Māori wards are a great way, our great representation mechanism for registered voters that are on the Māori roll. And I support this because I believe that it supports the council's mana whenua partners, rangitane, and who have expressed also a desire for us to maintain or retain the current structure. And also because I believe that it will ensure Māori have greater access to decision making at a local level. And the reason why I support this as well is because I feel that Māori wards have not just benefited Māori or local iwi in particular, but has made a council, has benefited our community, actually, a wider community, and have enriched our council in terms of our decision making, seeing the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Fitzgerald on the council has enriched our experience this term and have provided us with some insight that none of us have on the table, bringing in that mana whenua perspective around council decision making. So for that's why I'll be supporting the decision to retain the current structure that we have also at the moment. Māori wards increases our diversity and also encourages Māori representation and decision making. They go some way in, addressing or redressing some discriminatory treatment and building more inclusive, resilient communities by restoring trust in authorities from Māori community, setting up communication channels and access to specialized knowledge held by Māori communities for the benefit of the wider community. Now, I was a bit disappointed in the government's position on this, especially in particular around this bill and the process in which the bill was passed. And I don't believe that a poll gives Maori voters an opportunity to decide on their own participation. Palmer's North, last time I checked, the Maori role in Palmer's North was made up of about 10% of the population, meaning that 90% of the population was not Maori in Palmer's North. And the Maori population amounts to 73% of the population around the country, meaning that almost over 80%, just over 70% of the population are not Maori. So this is a way for us to also give Maori an opportunity to decide on their own representation. I believe that a binding poll does not do that. To require 5% of the voting population to initiate a referendum on proposal of Māori wards simply amounts to a tyranny of the majority. So for that reason, I will not be supporting option 2, but I'll be supporting option 1, which is to retain the current structure. I also believe that the bill which was passed by the current government also breaches Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And we have an obligation under the Local Government Act to ensure that we give effect to the Treaty of Waitangi in the way that we work, or in our dealings, or in our decision making. And doing this actually removes part of that as well. Following the government's directive actually removes part of that, because none of us are experts and can represent Maori, but we can speak for Maori. So having the 2 councillors that we have currently, which is Councillor Fitzgerald, and also the Deputy Mayor on the table, actually enriches that experience for us. So on that basis, I'll be voting for option 1, and then I'll seek to take a division on the amendment that was passed earlier on. Thank you.
Councillor, we're voting on the substantive. The division was already shown on the screen earlier on and will be in the minutes, so we won't be doing anything extra than that. Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge Whaia Debbie and Pa Rowley, just in terms of their representation on our Te Puo Māori Ward, and for the valuable perspectives that they bring to this chamber and to council. I guess in discussing Māori wards, we actually have to have a conversation about some very uncomfortable truths. And those uncomfortable truths are that Māori are disproportionately disadvantaged across many social dimensions in Aotearoa, including health, education, income, poverty, justice and corrections, housing, and many others. I've had a front row seat, I think, for 44 years while I was in the police, of how that disadvantage plays out for Māori whānau who live in some of our suburbs. And I bring that knowledge to this chamber. Māori make up 18% roughly of our population. That means 1 in 5 of our population are Māori. And that is actually going to grow in the coming years. And I want you to just hold that number in mind, because we really need to be thinking about how we actually capture the potential of our nation. And this particular piece of horrible legislation that has been pushed through by government absolutely disregards that potential. The Deputy Mayor talked about the various other pieces of legislation that this government has rushed through, which are absolutely, blatantly counter-Māori interests, and diminishes the mana of Māori in Aotearoa. And I'll list them, that I've got anyway, and there are more. The review of the treaty principles. Disestablishment of the Māori Health Authority. Removal of Te Reo Māori from official naming conventions for our government departments. More topically is the intention to remove Section 7AA from the Oranga Tamariki Act, where OT should consider whakapapa around the care and protection of our mokopuna. Just yesterday, Ngāpui from up north went to Parliament and they told our government they had over 800 children in the care of Oranga Tamariki. That is a very significant number of young people. So it is in their interests that that piece of legislation is retained. More recently, the removal of te tiriti considerations for whāmek and changes to legislation to make it harder, almost impossible, for Māori to lodge claims around seabed and foreshore. Like it is a very, very cynical, deliberate and intentional path the government is taking to marginalise Māori. And so why would the government actually do this? It's counter to social interests, it's counter to economic interests of our country, and it is counter to community cohesion. Why would you economically and socially isolate 20% of your population? Why would you do that and actually inhibit our ability to encapsulate the potential of our entire nation? It is wrong. Fundamentally, on every level, it is wrong. When Māori thrive, our nation will prosper. We need to harness the full potential of our people. This is a question of empowerment, inclusion, and value. It is a question of equity. So let's vote for option 1, and then next year, let's fight like hell to make sure that we win that referendum. Thank you.
Can I just remind councillors about their time, speaking time? Yeah, thank you. I know it's important, but I'm just wary of time. Councillor Bellin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think I have pre-timed myself. I should be under time. So thank you, firstly, so much for the community to turning out today to engage on this important issue. E ngā mihi ki a rangitānei, te mana whenua o Papaioia, tēnā koutou. Ngā mihi hoki ki ngā kaikaunihira o te pūwau, tēnā kōrua. Mā te ngā kau aroha koe te ārahi. Let a loving heart guide your decisions. First up, the Pacifica Reference Group has asked me at their meeting last night to convey to the Chamber, to you, on their behalf, their wholehearted support for Māori Rangitānei as mana whenua and for Māori wards. So I'm very privileged to share that message with you on their behalf, and thank you very much to the members who have given their time to be here today. Ngā mihi to you whānau. I think it's really important that we get some perspective on how far we've actually come as a nation, because we've come from a country where it didn't even permit Māori to stand as MPs. We have 4 Māori seats, we have a Māori party in full swing and 33 Māori parliamentarians. From facing many, many setbacks, we have seen iwi after iwi build back and work in effective partnerships to create and do awesome things. From Te Reo Māori being actively suppressed and nearly lost, thanks to legends like our Deputy Mayor, there has been at least a 30% increase in people who can speak Te Reo Māori since 2018. That's massively on the rise. Pretty much the greatest comeback for any Indigenous language of a colonised country, with Māori and non-Māori learners alike making more demand than there are in fact teachers. From being a country which blatantly polluted its waters, we now have, or we had, I can't actually keep up, Te Mana o Te Wai, which applies a Māori lens to water policy across the whole nation. And from having no consistent Māori voice in local communities, we now have a consistent Māori voice in our local community that allows us to access and engage with a significant portion of our population who are very much disengaged and disenchanted with us. Our Māori wards open that door for communication, for dialogue and for partnership. So when I'm faced with today's decision, I'm just thinking, who is this for? Who is this in aid of? Who is suffering because Māori wards are in play that justifies such urgency and such perverse stretching and undermining of our democratic process. Who benefits from this? Te Peti Te Awi Awi said, I have laid the foundations of friendship for you to bring to completion, and we honour that friendship here. It endures here and it flourishes here. It's a really strong friendship. While friends back friends when it counts, and this is when it counts, whānau, I believe that Māori have the right to representation as the original sovereign people of our shared nation. And if you're a councillor thinking that Māori shouldn't have that representation awards, then I would assume that you are personally willing to do the mahi to gain the trust and the confidence of our Māori communities enough to even begin to claim to represent them and their voice. Māori wards come with that inbuilt. They come with the trust and respect that we have yet to earn. But back to Māori having basic representation rights, as the OG sovereign people, denying rights to an entire race based on a principle never ends up on the right side of history. You show me the example where a governing body said, hey, you people over there, you can't have this unless you insert principle here, and they're the good guys in that story. It has yet to happen. This is a moment for our history books. Your vote counts towards the great progress that we have made together as a country to move away from a coloniser narrative and to embrace our common interests, like the environment and what makes us unique as a country. That's the kind of New Zealand I want my kids to know. That's what I'm voting for, ko tahitanga. And I am not letting a biased, racist, personal principle held by some minister determine the representation rules for an entire people at the expense of everything that's been built. Because that's the only logical explanation for why a government would pursue this course of action in such a reprehensible way. It's just offensive. We have heard that the legislation has no consequences and hasn't been tested. Let's test it. We have everything to gain with Māori wards and literally nothing to lose. No one loses. Not one person is any worse off for having Māori ward seats. There is in fact a net benefit. And actually I really, really want this to be Minister Brown's legacy, that he drove a change that was so divisive and so harmful that he mobilised an uprising of warriors against him, of generations of New Zealanders of all origins and ages who are proud of Te Ao Māori and willing to stand together to defend it. Simeon Brown might just inspire kotahitanga unity on an unprecedented scale, and I would love that to be his legacy. So I'm just going to finish up with some words that we often say in this chamber. We don't always reflect on what they mean. Tūturu whakamaua kia tīna. Hold fast. Keep going. Don't give up. This group is united and ready to progress the purpose of us coming together. Haumie, huie. Kia ora, thank you.
Perfectly timed. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief, as per usual. Chamber, good morning. Look, I'd just like to acknowledge the gallery here this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge the dozens and dozens of positive emails for Māori wards that I've received the last few days. I'd also like to acknowledge I hadn't received one against keeping the ward. So I think that's important to say. I appreciate all my colleagues around this table, and looking at the, some other councils around the country and the dysfunction that there is, I think we're very lucky at the unity that we do have. On a final point, I'd just like to say I'm a firm believer of looking forward and not looking back. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also look to be brief. I just wanted to say that I fully believe we should have representation that reflects our community, and that consistently saying that open, fair and transparent processes are in the Local Government Act, and people want to have confidence in who represents them and engage in the process of even voting. And so I think that's a very fundamental point of representation. And to say that this is the main gig that's causing the problems over all these geographical areas over what other wards could look like, and saying that those people that's put their names forward are going to represent me instead of someone in the other ward that I want to vote for, I think is, is crazy. It's no parallels to it. And so just a case study, because I think our members here, our colleagues, have spoken very well and very aligned to where I've been believing. But for a case study at my house, I've got a wife and 4 kids. I now have 2 grandkids. And 4 out of the 5 have made their choice to be on the Māori roll and have voted for you guys, even though you didn't have any competition, rather than me. And I'm very comfortable with that. Very, very comfortable, because that is their choice, that is their belief, and I think that's okay. And I think more people, everyone should have that choice. And if they choose to be on a Māori roll, well then why not have a Māori electorate in a local government setting to be represented in? And that just seems simplistic and straightforward. And I don't know why this government's complicating the progress and the success of it. So, yeah. So I'm going to vote full-heartedly to support this recommendation. And I think any other messages we can be sending this government around our distaste and reservations around this binding referendum, I think we should be taking advantage of. The other things I take distaste to, because I think Councillor Hancock actually outlined a number of facts around this government's approach to this. But when they start saying that mayors don't reflect our local communities, when they've come through unitedly, trying to send send a fair message early on and be kicked for touch as if you don't know what you're talking about. So I'm backing you, Mr. Mayor, and many others that stood together on our behalf, actually, and being poo-pooed. I find that's a little bit of disregard for our sector and our community and our people. And so, you know, if whatever message we can be sending, I think we should be doing it unitedly. And if we're leading the way for the rest of the councils to kind of take an approach to add on something like this, you know, anything we can do, I think will build some strength. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and firstly, to thank you indeed for being a voice in the national media in support of Māori representation. It has made me incredibly proud of this council and this city to see that representation and to hear the comments today from so many colleagues. Thank you. Just a few comments that I do want to make in support of retaining Te Pua Māori Ward. I want to touch on the new law, touching on our city's future, and on our practical response. So on the new law, in a word, it is outrageous. It is outrageous that objectively racist legislation, a law that targets Māori people and only Māori people, has emerged from this coalition government. And it's outrageous that that law attacks our nationhood and in fact attacks this community by directly undermining the treaty and everything that flows from it, including the right for the treaty guarantees for Māori to fill their seats at this table. It's outrageous that this government's legislative overreach is bringing the politics of race and division front and center into our community, and we've heard today about the dangers of that. So we have a very clear message for that coalition. Our outrage is only exceeded by our optimism. Palmerston North, we are a thriving multicultural city built on bicultural foundations, and our future is bright, and that future will not be dimmed, it will not be derailed by this legislative attack. While this outrageous law is divisive, we know our city will rise above. And how do we know that? Because we know that we're a city that knows our history and values our history, a city that values our partnerships. We see the value that the benefits of Māori wards are delivering in every corner of the community, not just for Māori, but as we've heard, for Māori and non-Māori alike. We've seen the value that it delivers right here at this table. The simple fact is that the Māori ward is good for all of us, all 90,000 of us. And I would say that in over 150 years of democracy being practiced in this city, in our strengthening relationships with Rangatane, we are in the strongest position ever, and our future is bright indeed. So yes, we can be confident that Palmerston North will rise above what next. In knowing that, I am also saddened by the pain and by the harm that this divisive law is creating and will continue to create. History tells us very clearly that laws like this unleash waves of hateful and bigoted actions. That laws like this will turn neighbor against neighbor, they will turn colleague against colleague, they will turn friends against friends, and yes, they will turn family against family. And that is a shame that is on this government. For what purpose? To attempt to undermine, at great cost, a proven political structure, a ward that was lawfully established in consultation in the very community, and a ward that is delivering incredible representatives, acknowledge Councillor Fitzgerald and Deputy Mayor Marshall Lobb, and is delivering incredible value to our whole community. I touched in questions on the risk of this referendum triggering waves of disinformation and misinformation coming into this community. And it's incredibly important that we as a council and the community in support of Māori representation is very clear to get the facts and get the information out there. So I'm very much looking forward to a paper coming back to ensure that we fill the vacuum of information with simple facts and information needed so that voters can make an informed choice. To know that our nation's unique foundation and heritage gives rise to those treaty rights, that it is the absolute right of Māori to fill their seats at this table, and that right is guaranteed in the treaty and the very foundations of our nation. Finally, a brief comment, Mr. Mayor. Laws are getting flipped in Wellington faster than burgers at McDonald's. And we're the ones getting burned. So I hope that one thing that will come from this terrible law is an appetite to actually get a constitution in place for this nation sooner rather than later, and that it has clear boundaries and structures, so that what we call local government is in fact that, and not just local administration of flip laws forced on us by a power-hungry cabinet. So wrapping up, Mr. Mayor, I come to this with quite mixed feelings. I'm proud to yet again vote for Te Pua Māori Ward, and I will always be proud to vote for that. I am confident in its proven value, brimming with optimism that the people of the city will uphold and guarantee the rights for Māori representation. But I also am casting this vote under protest at an absolutely outrageous law, a law that harms us all, that harms our treaty partners in particular, by questioning their right to fill their seats at this table. Kia kaha te Papioia, kia kaha te Pua Māori Ward.
Thank you, councillors. And look, just in right a reply and summing up, I just want to thank the public that have commented that here in the chamber, and it's impressive to see what was a full gallery, although it's starting to empty out at the moment. The tens of emails and letters that I've received in the last week, and like Councillor Arnott, I don't think I've had one negative one. They've all been quite positive in retaining Māori wards and the value of that, which you've all articulated very, very well. I do wonder if there's two tails wagging this dog at the moment, and this legislation is massive overreach, which is probably an understatement. The Māori wards are working generally pretty well in local government, and especially here. And even the hardened redneck would have to admit that. So I just, we're just seeing action here today. Just want to acknowledge two partners. You've really enriched our council. Thank you. So, why do we, why change what is really working? So, councillors, please support the retention of the Māori Ward, and let's make it unanimous. Let's vote, please. That is passed 15 votes for, none against. That's a good note to break for morning tea. We'll be back in the chamber at 15:15. Thank you. Kia ora tātou, welcome back everybody. Moving through to our next order of business, this is around Fongo Lagoon landscaping and an update there with budget provision. I'll invite Aaron Phillips, our Activities Manager for Parks and Reserves. Kia ora, Aaron. You haven't got a massive gallery watching you on this one, so
No,
floor is yours.
A little bit more relaxed, well, hopefully. Good morning, councillors. A couple of quick notes on this one, then I'll give you a quick overview because it's a little bit difficult to explain in words, but hopefully a little bit better verbally. First off, apologies, there's a couple of typos that have been caught late. In the problem and opportunity summary in section 1.3, I've incorrectly labelled the years. They should have been 24-25 and 25-26. However, that doesn't affect the recommendations. They're still fine. That's just within the report. And we're talking about the space in figure 2 in section 2.3, the Whakarongo. We're calling it at this stage, although it's not officially named, the Whakarongo Oxbow, the urban growth area there. Basically, the developer is required as part of the change that was approved quite a long time ago in their resource consent to rehabilitate that lagoon space, including taking care of pest plants, doing some planting and putting in a walkway. They've been developing housing but have yet to do that required work, and over the last few months we've come to the conclusion with them and in discussions with the resource consent planners that it might be better, or the council itself is better placed to carry out that sort of work. It's not typically a developer, doesn't typically do a lot of plant pest control, planting and walkway work. So what we have before you is a request to establish a budget that would allow council to do that. Anticipation of questions, possibly you could argue that I should have got this up as part of the 10-year plan. It is rates neutral. I'd just like to be clear that the developer will pay all the costs, will essentially act as the contractor for the developer rather than someone else who he would normally engage. And the developer has requested that we use a bond that's being held for other works at that location, so relating to stormwater eroding works, once he's completed those other works and that bond is no longer required. It creates a slightly messy situation for us, not as clean cut as we might like, but trying to be responsive to the developer requests. He's asked if we could just use the bond when he's done completed those bonded works. But the total amount required, as you see in the report, is more than the bond, and we'll be asking for a payment of just a little over 104,000 up front to complete the first part of those works. And then would carry on with the works over the next 2 financial years if you're happy to establish the budget for us to do that. If you were to decline the proposal, then we'd go back to the developer and say he needs to do the work himself. Just so you're aware, the developer is also required to maintain the works for a period of 3 years. We've agreed that we would do the maintenance works, similar as the development works, and that's our operations team have estimated that at 21,000 per year. And in light of the fact that this is the developer's last work in that area, we've asked for that to be paid largely up front so that we don't run into any situations or carry any risks where the developer might have closed that company down and moved on, and we're seeking maintenance budgets annually from him. So he would pay up front, but that wouldn't kick in for a year because we won't have done any of the work, so we won't need to have moved into a maintenance. So yeah, he would pay us 63,000 up front after a year of the works has started. So that's the situation. Apologies that perhaps that should have been in the LTP, but just again to emphasise there's no effect on rates. We'll be using money already billed or from the bond.
Okay, thanks Aaron. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Aaron. In terms of adding this budget to the capital, presume it will go on, is that going to have any effect on our headroom and stuff like that? Because I know that we were quite tight when we were doing the long-term plan in terms of the capital new budgets. So I don't know if anyone from finance perhaps could answer that.
I'm happy to take a punt, but it might be corrected. Or
Scott,
there's no point going on. Sorry.
Through Mr. Mayor, Mackay, GM Corporate Services.
no, it shouldn't have any impact because effectively we're getting money in to offset this, so it would be neutral.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Councillor Bellin.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Aaron. Just curious, this is a requirement in the subdivision consent conditions that this work be completed. That's correct. Eh?
Correct.
So, based on the number of complaints and things, I'm just wondering whether you've observed an intention or a budget from the developer to undertake this work up in, like, it seems like there's not been much intention to actually complete the work in the first place. I'm wondering how we got to this point where we've said, well, we're better off doing it because you don't really do this kind of stuff and you probably won't do it quite right.
The work, the development's been progressing in stages, and up till this point, the consents planners have agreed that these works didn't need to be completed for the earlier stages, and we're heading towards the final stages now. And the consents planners have said, well, you can't complete any of your further stages till these works are completed. There might be an argument that maybe we should have required them to be completed a little bit earlier. But yeah, this is where we are now.
But so in terms of that timeline, have you seen any indication or preparation or budget lines or anything that would indicate that there was an intention to fulfil this condition?
I certainly believe there was an intention to fill it, but they're looking to fill it at the end of the subdivision process, at the start for cash flow reasons, I assume.
Sure, cool, thank you. And just at 3.1, there's a really helpful breakdown of the costs, and that's in accordance with the subdivision consent. Do we have ability to sort of get some cost efficiencies with that budget, or is that a budget for us that's been updated?
That was prepared in-house by our council officers to say this is what we essentially quoted to the developer to do the works when we discussed our council doing the works on his behalf. And he needed to agree that we were reasonable in our prices. He may have said that he thought we were too expensive, for example, and sought other contractors to do the work, but he's agreed to this price, and our operations team are confident they can carry out the works with these budgets.
Great, so any efficiencies are accounted for in the budget?
Yeah.
Awesome, thanks very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hunnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Aaron. Was there a time in the contract that this had to be completed by the developer?
It's relating back to the stages of the development, the subdivisions that have occurred, and I can't remember the stage numbers, and unfortunately Jeff Baker apologises, he's unable to attend the meeting today. He was caught up in environment court mediation. So I'm speaking a little bit out of my expertise area, but the most recent application for a further stage has been withheld, if you like, or we've required that these works be completed before any further subdivision occurs.
Right, okay. Do we get to know who the developer is?
It's now, hopefully I got the name right, it's Challenge Manawatu. It's Mr. Marriott, one of Mr. Marriott's companies.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Aaron. Just wanted to know, is this setting a precedence, and is it favourable for us? You know, is there a margin of profit that we're making as a council, or is it on discount?
Yeah, not a profit, so to speak. We're doing it at the cost of operating for council. There are potentially some advantages, and it gives a good workflow for our workforce. Were we to have less work in some other areas of parks, it keeps the workforce well engaged. I guess there's an argument it might spread some overheads to across some jobs. Hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, and my boss is not shaking her head behind me. But not a profit, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I'm not shaking my head, but just in response to in terms of precedent. So councillors, as we've moved into the Whakarongo area, And you would be aware with Tamakuku, some of the issues we've had with the stormwater work there. We're moving into an area which is quite new for a lot of the developers in the city in terms of dealing with the stormwater treatment and maintaining these types of environments. And when council has recently developing the new stormwater retention pond, for example, the parks operations have become more involved in sort of saying, what is the best way to plant that? What are the best plant species than we perhaps would have been in the past in these developments? So you're probably going to see a bit more of this around things like stormwater retention, stormwater management and rain gardens, where potentially we will be, the council itself may be managing that in an agreement with the developer or doing some of the works or engaging some of those works so that we get the right standard. Some of the learnings from Tamakuku was we've had to go back and do quite a bit of rework around the plants and some of that because of the lack of expertise of our local conditions and the type of soils we're dealing with, in particular in Whakarongo.
Thank you. You've answered my question in terms of like it's setting the standard, ensuring from start that it's to a good standard. So thank you. Kia ora.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This must go back well over 15 years.
No, it's stretching my memory, Councillor. But
well, I was a commissioner on it, so I can remember that.
Yes, the plan change was quite some time ago.
Yeah, and my understanding back then was that that old riverbed was to be all done up ready before there was any development done. Was that not the way it was supposed to be done?
No, that's up to the consenting planners to decide at what stage the conditions need to be met.
Yeah,
it's a tension for us because the developers, trying to be business friendly, the developers have got to manage cash flows, so they have to do everything up front. It's quite expensive.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Aaron and Kathy. Just a quick question. Was this consent condition subject to things like 223, 224 certificates?
Yes.
Yeah. So that aerial shot on 2.3, those houses were part of the subdivision and they've been sold?
Yes.
Prior to the subdivision consent being issued?
No, so the subdivision consents have been issued in stages, and the housing that you can see in place there would have been some of the earlier stages, and the vacant areas may be subject to further stages yet to be done.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron.
All right, that's questions done. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Kathy. All right, we've got recommendations to council. 1 and 3. 1, that council agree to add a new program titled Fongo Lagoon Landscaping Development for 24-25 and 25-26 financial years. Council agree a capital budget for Fongo Lagoon Landscaping Development Program of $258,605.75, excluding GST, for the 24-25 year, to be funded by capital revenue from the developer. The council note that a new capital budget of $258,000 for 25-26 year to be referred to the 25-26 annual budget to be funded by capital revenue from the developer. And 4, that council note it will receive $63,000 income in the 25-26 year to cover 3 years of maintenance of the landscaping for the 25-26 to 27-28 period. This will be included in the appropriate annual budgets. I'm happy to, there's 5, I think, that council note that the 27-28 long-term plan will account for operational renewal costs beyond 2028. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Aaron. I think Councillor Finlay's right. It has been on the books for some time, so it's good to see this finally being brought to fruition. So that's excellent. Right, is there anybody wishing to speak? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Zabellin.
Yes, just to say, on reading the report, I did have a concern that this approach isn't necessarily the best look if we want to encourage compliance with our consent conditions. If we sort of step in to do the work to make sure that it's completed in a timely manner and to the standard that we want, regardless of who pays. But actually, on reflection and from hearing from the officers, I think that the principles of being good partners and working in good faith for the outcomes that we want to see sort of trump that concern for me. I think, especially considering the important part that local expertise play in making sure that landscaping is functioning properly. So I will support that on the basis that we'd like to be good partners and constructive. Thanks.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just be brief again. Look, I don't think it's acceptable for a developer to be laying down the law, to be honest. I think they should be doing things themselves in a timely manner. So I won't be voting for this. Thank you.
All right. I encourage the rest of you to vote for this. All right, we will vote. And that is passed. Thank you. 14 votes and 1 against. All right. We'll move through now to number 10, which is the reappointment of trustees and directors of council-controlled organisations. There's a paper there in page 41 of your papers. I'll take it as being read. This is somewhat academic in how we deal with things, but we do need to have a resolution on the table to go through things. If there are there questions? Okay, Councillor Bowen. Just wait for officer to get there.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, Mr. Mayor. So my questions are particularly about Palmerston North Airport Limited, where I see we're proposing to advertise for 2 new board members, but in their letter, they've been really clear that they only want 1 new board member. So I imagine they're proposing that they would like to see the reapplying board member reappointed, but I wondered how we might capture their request that they don't want 2 new board members, they want 1 or 2 members, one of whom should be new. Is it possible to do that?
No. Under our policy, I don't think we can.
Well, it is possible for excuse me. Of course, it is possible for council to reappoint one of the members if they wish. It is up to you.
No, sorry, Sarah, I'm not suggesting reappointing. I'm just suggesting that if we're going to market and saying we're looking for 2 new board members, are we really looking for 2, or are we actually looking for 1 new board member?
Oh, I see. That would actually require a change to their constitution, which would be, which would necessitate a whole new process. So.
Okay. Well, we'll cross that bridge in panel then, I suppose. And my other question was just about the appointment panel, which didn't seem to line up. The thing in the paper didn't seem to line up with our policy. So the appointment panel includes the chair of finance, which has been our position traditionally, but the policy has the mayor, the chief executive, and the chair of economic or culture or relevant committee. So just a question really then about how that lines up.
Sorry, I don't have the policy in front of me, but I believe it's an appointment committee of 4, and it's either or the economic growth chair or the culture and sport chair, depending on the CCO being appointed.
Yes, my question is about the chair of finance, because that isn't specified in our policy. So our policy says mayor, chief executive, chair of economic growth or relevant committee, chair of the deputy chair of culture and sport.
Oh, okay.
So our policy doesn't specify finance, and it suggests that the chair would be the chair of the appropriate committee rather than 2 chairs. It's an esoteric point, I suppose, but I'm just signalling that we don't seem to be quite lining up with our policy and how we're approaching this.
Okay.
So you can take that offline and have a think
I
about
have to
it.
take that offline, sorry.
Thanks. That's it. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we'll get back to the recommendation. So we've got the recommendation there around council commencing an appointment process, inviting candidates, maybe we use the word candidates, to apply for 2 trustee positions on the Globe Theatre Trust Board, 2 trustee positions on the Regent Theatre Trust Board, 2 director positions on the Palmerston North Airport Limited, and 2 trustee positions on the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust. I'm happy to move that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Dennison. Look, councillors, again, somewhat academic. We've always had a policy of even if we're reappointing someone, look to the market. It's transparent and real, and it does create some turnover as well. So I hope you can support this, and we've got good letters of where each of the organisations stand as well. Thank you. We'll vote. That's passed, 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, moving through to number 11, which is our Central Football Massey University and the City's artificial football turf. And just invite Aaron Phillips, again, Activities Manager of Parks and Reserves, page 51 of your papers, councillors. Aaron, welcome.
Councillors, there's nothing new to or substantive to report. Just wanted to quickly update you on how we're going with that particular project. The collaboration, we've shifted from an MOU to a collaboration agreement on the advice of our external legal team. Otherwise, we're addressing the matters raised with you in previous reports back in December 2023. We are trying to push quite hard with it so that the Massey Foundation and Central Football can crack on with the fundraising components of that project in advance of other projects that council have that it's looking to externally fund, such as Te Motua Potua. We just wanted you to be aware that the Chief Executive will sign that collaboration agreement off under delegated authority, and hope you're happy with us progressing.
Thank you, Aaron. No questions. Okay, we've got a recommendation there, or recommendations to council around noting the progress to advance the development of artificial football turf at Massey University. To the council, the collaboration agreement for the artificial football field at Massey University will be signed into delegation by the Chief Executive. I'm happy to seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Aaron, and to the officers to get this moving. I've had a meeting with the various parties, and they're well advanced wanting to do in terms of raising money, so it's a good sign. And again, like our athletics track and our hockey turf, it'll be another great facility for the wider community. Any other comments? Councillor Naylor.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, it was actually a question. I just probably came in slightly late. Just can I ask a question? Is that all right?
The question's there, but
just in on page 52, under 2.2, the fourth resolution. I'm not sure if the original resolution was incorrect or if it's just that says that the 199,000 will be unspent in 2022 to 24. I'm presuming that's 23-24. Or
that's the resolution.
it's typo. It's 23-24. And the question was, do we have a corresponding program brought? Is that being brought forward for 25, or is that just incorporated in the year 2 program of 867?
Sorry. Can an officer answer that?
That's correct, Councillor. As point 1.1, the budget sits in year 2. The council's budget sits in year 2 in 25-26. Any design works that need to happen in advance that will be funded by the university and Central Football.
So there's no. So am I correct to understand that there's no budget for this current year?
No, not in this current year. It's in year 2.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
All right, back to where we were. We're going to vote on the recommendation. Thank you. Passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, moving through to number 12, Civic and Cultural Precinct update. And just invite our GM of Strategic Planning, David Murphy, on to speak to that. Page 55 of your papers, councillors.
Morena koutou, Mr Mayor, councillors. This is obviously just a brief update report. It largely details matters canvassed during the lead up to and the course of the LTP process that we've recently been through. As detailed in the report, the steering group hasn't met for a period of time. Last time they did meet, they heard from Tauranga, who have been going through a similar process, facing similar financial challenges, I guess, to council and a number of the other councils across the country. So there's some good lessons there, which are detailed briefly in the report. There is some operational funding in years 1 to 3 to look at getting the structure right for how we are going to take this project forward. So really the next steps are engaging again with the steering group and thinking about the scope and process for advancing this project. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, David. Can you just remind me who's on the steering group?
There is, the Mayor is the chair. There is, I think, Councillor Barrett, Councillor Bowen, Rangatane. I think there's the chamber, the bid. I can circulate the terms of reference. Well, I think they are actually available in that link within the report that goes back to the terms of reference report. But that's just from memory, but I'm happy to circulate the terms of reference.
Okay, and what's the delegated decision making to the steering group?
They have no delegated decision making.
Okay, and what's the reporting back process for the steering group to the whole of council?
So there's a requirement in the terms of reference for a 6-month update, which is this is the first of those. So yeah, and certainly the first meeting was more an overview of the history of the project, and the second meeting was a presentation from Tauranga. So there hasn't sort of been formal minutes and those sorts of things, but we will look to formalise the process and make sure that those are part of 6 monthly updates in the future.
Okay, so we could expect the minutes to be part of the 6 monthly updates going forward?
Or at least key action items.
Okay, so under point 3, next steps, when it says arrange a meeting of the steering group to discuss the recommended way forward and the approach to utilising the operational funding allocated, how is that not going to be a decision-making process?
Yeah, I think I would also refer you to the text at the bottom of page 56. The potential approach outlined above would need to be informed by the experts' advice and then confirmed by the council before any further work is undertaken. So I think what we're, like all the steering groups, I think what we're doing is using them to help shape the project, but making sure that any formal decision making on projects occurs through the chamber.
Okay, well, as long as that does happen, I'll be happy. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just looking at the bottom of page 56, the 100,000 for the next 3 years and the outline of what that's to be used for, year 1, agree scope or brief, year 2, year 3. Like, does it cost $100,000 to agree a scope or brief? Like, I mean, I guess my question is, are those amounts of money required for those activities, or perhaps is the funding more than it needs to be for the activities that are outlined?
Well, I think part of that operational funding is while those are the steps, I think we're going to need some specialist advice on how to structure this. So we're entering new territory, and potentially we're talking about forming strategic partnerships with major players that are going to have a connection and relationship to the city for many years ahead, if we've in terms of the scale of these projects. to give you an indication of what's involved in advancing projects of this scale, when we heard from Tauranga, they had a team of 30 staff working on their civic and cultural precinct project. So what we're looking at is a budget of $100,000 to get some good advice about how we take this project forward.
Okay.
Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, David. I'm just looking at the paragraph just before number 3 on page 57 about the external funding and financing options being considered alongside the other external funding and financing options for other projects. Is that paragraph sort of indicating a flag towards a more competitive funding field more widely in the local government sector, or more a signal that we might need to be doing some ruthless prioritising if we're seeking for a lot of funding for a lot of things at once?
Probably more the latter. So as you'll know, no decision, particularly decisions on major projects, are made in isolation. And I think what we saw through the LTP is that however we fund all of these major projects going forward, the affordability for the community is going to need to be thought about the whole way along that process. So, you know, while we can look for external funding for projects, ultimately the community still need to pay for those projects.
Great, thank you. And so that particular sort of conundrum, is that a matter for the steering group to be considering and presenting sort of considerations to us, or is that more of a council consideration?
I'm sure the steering group will have views on those, but those are matters that would be decided and debated around this table.
Great, thanks very much.
David, just on the steering group and that budget there, if it's quite long, and I appreciate there's quite a lot to be done, and also you know, recommendations and report back to a full council, but if we were to get some traction in market penetration, could year 2 and 3 come together?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right. No further questions? Okay. All right, we've got a recommendation to council there that we received titled Civic and Cultural Precinct 6 Monthly Update, presented 7th of August 2024. Thank you, David, and to the officers. I look to move, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillors, I sense from some of your questions that you're wanting more information, so it's been a very long touch at present because we've had LTP and we've really haven't had a lot of meetings in the space. We did have one walk around the sites, which I think Councillor Barrett was at, and I think Councillor Bowen, I'm not sure if you were there, but it was enlightening to see the condition of our buildings, good and bad, and the challenge that we've got. But the steering group will obviously bring everything back here. It's a massive decision what we've got to do, so it does need to come back in here for even the littlest of things. So you can be assured that that's happening. But it does need a steering group to actually start to get the thing going too. So it's a bit of a balancing act there. All right, ask you to vote, please. Has passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, we move through to our council work schedule, and that is on page 59. Just ask the CE if there's anything he wants to add. Wade.
Through the chair, I'm happy to take any questions on this. Maybe just a note that possibility that the Food HQ Innovation report may not quite be ready, or might not be. Officers of, I think Mr. Dyberg might be away on the 2nd of October. So possible that that might go to the 30th of October meeting, but we'll be able to provide you a better update closer to that time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, we have a number of questions. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. 2 questions. One around item 8. which indicates that it will be the 11th of December before we can confirm the calendar for 2025. Is that possible for that to come forward to, say, October?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we're aiming for the 2nd of October.
Could that be updated on the work schedule?
Yes.
Great, thank you. The other question was arising from point number 10 on the work schedule, where it indicates annual budget 25-26 for our December meeting, and then the annual budget doesn't further appear until hearings in April. So can I understand from an annual budget process point of view, are we looking to land the draft in December and then have a pause through until hearings, or is there something in between the December meeting and the April meeting as well?
Good points. I'll just ask for some, first from the CE and then maybe to Cam.
Through the chair, I'll go first, because I'll be right. So I think that what we'll do is that given the enormous amount of time that you spent during December last year, which I'm guessing where the question is potentially coming from, we might put out a bit of a timeline to you to kind of explain what it is that we're thinking in terms of the steps through that annual plan process, and look to get that out to you in the next couple of weeks or so, so you've got a bit more of a heads up, and then we'll make sure that meetings and things line up with the correct dates on here as well.
Great, thank you. No further questions.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to ask about the delivery model options for property. I recall we lay an item on the table regarding the tenders to deliver the Summer Haze property development. Given this would be delaying it another 4, 5 or 6 months, I just want to ask if that's been communicated to those interested parties. Given this now isn't going to be delivered in September, the report, it'll be early 2025.
Yes, through the chair, we've also, great question, and also something that we've been thinking about over the last couple of weeks or so is that we've reflected back over a number of resolutions that the Chamber has made over a period of time relating to housing, social housing, looking at investment options and those sorts of things, and looking to bring back a paper a little bit earlier, collating all of those particular things together so that officers can get a very clear direction about what it is that you're asking us to do in this space. Also, just taken on board about contacting people back. I'll just check with Bryce Hoskin, who might be able to just provide some further detail around that.
Kia ora, councillors. Bryce Hosking, Manager of Property and Resource Recovery. Our last correspondence, we're keeping regular correspondence with them. The last update was that it would be towards the end of the year, so we didn't put an exact date on it. Should it look like that timeline is going to be pushing out, then we'll probably look to give them a more definitive timeline accordingly. I suspect since so much time has passed already, the right thing to do would be letting all of the parties who showed some interest to reconsider their plans and I guess inform us whether they still have availability to complete the project regardless.
Thank you. And so given this report wouldn't be coming to early 25, meaning that decision would need to be made after that, so it would be later in the end of this year, having dealt with these parties, do you think we run a risk of losing interest, or do you think they'll stay the length for another 6 months?
I think all of the parties will remain interested. Probably what I would say is, depending on their various projects that they have on the go, for pretty much all of them, we weren't the only one on their work schedule, so it'll just depend on what they've committed to and what they've commenced, and then that'll need to be considered as part of our decision.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Oh, thanks. Just coming back to the annual process for next year, and I understand we'll have a bit more of an outline, but the hearings, item 15, say that the hearings will be in April, and traditionally they're in mid or early to mid-May. I'm just wondering, is there a different process that we're considering for next year, or why that sort of looks like? Because then it's deliberations are in May and then adoption in June, so I'm just wondering why the hearings might be proposed to be April rather than May.
We're trying to look organised, but I think based on the Chief Executive's answer earlier, we'll give you a time frame of all the steps to get there and firm it up better.
Thank you.
All right, now we've got those questions out of the way. A lot of questions for a work schedule. We have the council receivers work schedule dated the 7th of August 2024. I'm happy to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We will vote, please. Has passed, 15 votes for, none against. All right, number 14 on our paper is a recommendation from Culture and Sport Committee, Part 1, Public, from the 26th of June 24. Ask the Chair, Councillor Bowen, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to present for adoption the recommendations of the Part 1 Public, Culture and Sport Committee from the 26th of June 2024, please.
And can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Meehan. Are there any no matters arising? We will vote. So that is 14 votes for, one abstention. All right. I will now look to move to exclude the public for part 2, but we're then going to have a lunch break. But we'll get this part of the meeting done, and that's for reasons, when I can find them. Okay. So for reasons of business dealings, you need to scroll down, please. You need to scroll down further, please. Business dealings and confidential and sensitive information. So I'm happy to move that we move into part 2, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No commentary. We will vote, please. Plus 15 votes for and none against. All right. I'll now look to adjourn the meeting till 1 o'clock. So enjoy your lunch, and we'll come back to part 2. McDonald's here. There's some burger.